I just wanted to say this video for me is gonna bring a lot of old memories. I've spent years long playing this expansion, and it's one of my favorites. I will remember it forever, I think. The Burning Crusade was one of the best games ever made that are multiplayer online games. For that time, when I was young, when I was like 12 years old, it was insane how you can play a game where you can see someone move the way you move your character. There was no, like, a lot of time there was no lag and FPS was high, and it was extraordinary to see like MMO game where you can duel something, and the bugs were there, bugs and glitches, but it was nothing bad. Like it was insane how good this game was back in the day, and I had a really fun time playing this when I was a kid. So let's enjoy this video.
The year is 2005, and the World of Warcraft has taken over the gaming world. Everyone's playing it. Your friends, coworkers, boss, celebrities.
I think the whole world.
It's all over the news, being created as either a revolutionary cultural phenomenon or as poison destroying the minds and innocence of the youth. It was one of the first widely used forms of social media, and it introduced people to the idea of a shared online virtual world
It was one of the most played games definitely in that time.
filled with people to meet and challenges to overcome, either alongside them or against them. The game at this point is inhabited by millions of players, each in their own microcosm of communities, and firmly entrenched in the throes of addiction.
Exactly.
And on October 28th, 2005, they learned for the first time that the world is about to get bigger with the announcement of its first expansion.
How many of you have played World of Warcraft?
Yeah. Nowadays you don't see this anymore, unfortunately.
In a very short time, we will be announcing details about the upcoming World of Warcraft expansion, the Burning Crusade.
Welcome to another episode of Why It Was, where we'll be covering exactly why the Burning Crusade was great.
Really long video as well. It will be fun
But
watching.
do you know what's also great? Having something to balance out that gamer diet of red meat and high fructose corn syrup. Which brings us to today's sponsor, AG1. You know how World of Warcraft sort of it's the only daily quest that I do, okay? And QR code involved, so too has social media as a whole. Design elements that once made the genre unique, most often quite predictable and formulaic at that. You choose a class, create a character, and burn through the leveling to reach the shiny end game. And you do that for a while until you get bored and wait for the next expansion. But back in these growing years of the genre, even the idea of an expansion was a new and exciting thing.
I would say Blizzard was the only company that was doing it that time. Basically no other game existed that I want you to, for the new people that are watching this video and are younger, I want you to understand how huge the Burning Crusade back in the day was. It was ahead of every game. Nobody stood a chance to stay near this game. It was huge difference with other games. Blizzard was the best company by far. They had no competition. They were really good.
World of Warcraft at this point was the standalone outlier. Most MMOs that came out lived quite short and uneventful lives. They often flopped, and they rarely turned a profit to warrant continue being supported, let alone having an entire expansion of content being developed for them. Today, you know what to expect. A new level cap, more zones and dungeons and raids, maybe a couple.
Exactly. Nowadays, every new expansion that comes out, you kind of expect what's gonna be new and what's gonna be released. Back in the day, when they released the Burning Crusade or the Wrath of the Lich King, you didn't expect those things because they were all in development. Every expansion brought something that has never been seen before with any other game. they had no rivalry with nobody. That's how insane Blizzard was back in the day.
New systems here and there, but back then, not so much. Especially if you took into consideration the fact that social media as a whole was still in its growing stage. YouTube at this point was a dating website. The streaming culture hadn't existed yet, and so the spread of information was still in its early stages. So the announcement of a new expansion was accompanied by this shroud of mystery, and the most that you could hope to learn about it was from the official blog, fan websites, and also, of course, word of mouth. But as time passed and the player base were enjoying what would eventually be the final stages of what is known today as Vanilla World of Warcraft, some of the more major features of the expansion would begin to become clear. And importantly, the announcement was made at the very first BlizzCon in 2005. Today, Blizzard has become quite synonymous with controversy and most discussion.
I mean, it's basically like that in life. I think it's really hard to keep a company that big that long. Blizzard used to be the biggest company, like I said before, and to keep that, how big they were with the coming years, that was basically impossible. But Blizzard moved the needle, I think, by far away by other games of how possible MMO games can get. And I would say that's the father of the games for MMOs and multiplayer games, online games. So they have definitely something that nobody had that time. They were far away from other competitors. That was like the first time the iPhone 1 was released. That was Blizzard back in the time. That's how huge it was.
And surrounding them is often laced with disappointment and pessimism, and it's for an understandable reason. The developer in recent years has been marked with controversy after controversy, whether it be lawsuits or just simply poor quality releases.
Like in the cinematic that says, "No king rules forever." That's exactly with Blizzard as well. They ruled the gaming industry for so long, but you cannot rule forever. No, it's impossible.
But if you were to go back in time to 2005 and tell Blizzard fans of all of this, they simply wouldn't believe you, because the developer at this point was one of the most beloved in the industry.
BlizzCon! 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 BlizzCon!
Their quality control was extremely strict, even canceling games if they felt like they weren't good enough. And because of this, no matter what game they released, whether it be an RTS or an action RPG, side-scroller, beat-em-up, whatever, if it had the Blizzard name attached to it, it was almost a guarantee that it was going to be genre-defining. They simply didn't miss, and as a result of that, the confidence of their fan base.
I have to say, to this day, they don't really miss many cinematics as well, or trailers. Back in the day, Blizzard made the best trailers or cinematics, and to this day, they're the best company, I believe, that does trailers or cinematics. I explained in my last video how huge the trailers or cinematics they do are for me. Often I watch them as motivation as well, of how good they are, and they're like cartoons characters, but still, they like so amazingly made. It's unbelievable for me.
Base was extremely high. It almost transcended a video game developer, and this was evidenced really well by BlizzCon. To their fans, it was more than just video game franchises. It was this celebration of the communities that grew around them, and because of this, Blizzard became one of the very first developers to host a convention dedicated to their games specifically. And it was only appropriate that one of their biggest announcements ever took place at their very first convention in 2005. People from across the world who met each other virtually now met face to face, and unbeknownst to them at the time, they paid witness to their defining title getting its sequel.
Exactly. So this is it, nostalgia. It hits, man. Black Temple.
The Dark Portal, which had long been dormant since the events of Warcraft 2, had finally awakened, which opened up a gateway into the realm known as the Outland. In the very first episode of the series, The Warlords of Draenor, we explored the old orc homeworld, where the various clans such as the Blackrock, Shadowmoon, and Hellscream resided. an expansion made possible by way of an alternate timeline where it deviated.
That's the cinematics I'm talking about, man. They were insane and still are. And I'm watching even them to this day. I still have saved a lot of clips or moments from those cinematics, even on TikTok. And I watch them often, they're crazy.
At that pivotal moment where the leader of the Iron Horde, Gromash Hellscream,
I even have him from the orcs behind me. There is a poster that you can see. That's how much I love these characters.
would accept Gul'dan's offering, turning he and his clan into mindless followers of the Burning Legion. So the Burning Crusade is the original timeline and set after the events of Warcraft 2, where the once lush and beautiful lands were destroyed and corrupted as the Burning Legion spread its influence across the world. This was the original demon expansion, while adventurers were busy fighting old gods and minions of the Lich King in Azeroth. Sargeras' Burning Legion was preparing for an invasion from the Outland.
For the new people here, if you have the time to read the story or follow it, it's really an amazing story, man, from World of Warcraft. I was always questioning myself, how is it possible they don't have movies made for those expansions and storyline? It's like the Harry Potter genre, if you're a fan of it. That's how Blizzard, I think, with their storyline is good. And I hope in the future they will release more movies about the storyline of World of Warcraft. It would be amazing to see. It can get huge, like a Marvel, I believe. I watch Marvel movies, I watch Harry Potter, but I can tell you there is something specific about Blizzard. This is insane. What for storyline they have and how interesting it is.
And through the Dark Portal, the world itself consisted of 7 zones, with enough quests to support 10 new levels of character progression, including new spells and more talent points to spend on brand new talents. In these 7 zones were a whopping 16 dungeons, and even more important was the new heroic difficulty setting. In the Legion episode, we discussed the Mythic Plus system and Blizzard's attempt to bring 5-man content up as a viable form of endgame. Heroics were the first attempt at this. As vanilla got older, naturally the players became better and more geared, and because of that, the dungeon slowly transitioned from the endgame to a stepping stone to the endgame for many of its player base. So Blizzard, at this point in time, saw that as a shortcoming, and they wanted dungeons to remain a real challenge, so they released this heroic difficulty.
That was an amazing idea back then, the way they did it. I think the Mythic Plus feature, what became later as well, it's a really good thing for the hardcore players. And yeah, they didn't fail that at all. It's a really good idea what they did.
Difficulty mode, which was essentially a scaled up version of the dungeon where the enemies and bosses had more health and they dealt more damage. Since we mentioned raiding, another big change that wasn't advertised on the box but was still equally huge was the reduction in size. Raiding in MMOs when vanilla first released didn't really have any set standards on player.
Exactly, I believe the point where they reduced from 40 people to 25, it was huge thing, and from that alone you could make the raids more interesting to see and play, because with 40 people it was really hard to raid, and I liked that feature that you can raid with like 25 people. It was much better, easier as well.
Size
took less time to group up and go somewhere and beat boss. This is just time saving was the best thing.
With instanced raid themselves being a rarity, it usually just boiled down to how many people could gather in one area before the servers crashed. So the idea of a maximum number of players was relatively unexplored. Eventually that number became 40.
Easy peasy, extra cheesy. Die Knusperminis von Leerdammer.
And their difficulty was, of course, designed around that, with a couple that were also limited to 20. In the end, they felt that the best number was somewhere in between, and they would substantially reduce it to 25 for most of them, and then 10 for the smaller raids. There were many reasons for this, but 2 of the big ones were to lighten the load on both the guild leaders and the developers. Coordinating 40 people to all be online
Exactly, all to be online at the same time, doing the same thing. nobody is AFK. That was really hard to manage. It was killing you to get the group up and everyone to be ready, and nobody has to go, everyone has time. That was hell.
At the same time is a pain that only vanilla guild and raid leaders understand.
Exactly.
It's the special maddening mix of finding replacements for absences, replacing members who quit, dealing out loot in a way that doesn't make people angry, dealing with guild drama, loot disputes, raiding consumables. It was certainly a second job by itself, and
Yes, it
Blizzard
was.
chewed them a bone by reducing the raid size to 25, but perhaps their primary reason was to lighten the load on their designers, as raids designed for 40 people introduced a number of challenges in their environment. The rooms had to be massive to hold 40 people and a boss, and the lay of the land generally had to be more horizontal than vertical. And this issue is shown quite perfectly with the vanilla version of the Karazhan raid. As you may know, this would eventually become one of the release raids for the Burning Crusade, but it was intended to be in the game as early as vanilla. But the issue, as described by former developer John Statz in his book, The Warcraft Diary, the developers had many issues in designing it, as they were just unable to create.
I want to say how crazy it was the way they designed Karazhan. It was one of the most beautiful raids ever done, and it's written or it's made like a book, like a film. The bosses that you fight are not really hard, but the way you play the instance, it was to have fun. It was made for fun. It was not made to be hard. It was made like watch a movie. That's how it was. And it was beautiful, a beautiful instance back then. Back then, I have to say, the Blizzard developers were so much more creative. They wanted to bring joy and happiness when people played the game. It was not like those nowadays where you have to sweat to beat a boss. Back in the day, it was really easy, and you had so much fun just playing it.
A vertical tower-like structure that could hold 40 people and a raid boss. Even given that, the map file itself in this failed version was extremely large and took hours to even load, and they were only able to get a final playable version in the expansion when they reduced its scale all the way down from 40 players to 10. But even outside of Karazhan, it would make the raids much easier to design since they were almost halving the conventional big endgame raid size.
Exactly.
Another one of the expansion selling points would be its two new races, the Blood Elves for the Horde and the Draenei for the Alliance. The latter are an Eridar race who fled from the Burning Legion's corruption. Aesthetically,
The storyline, it was much better back in the day, and when they released the character, it was really amazing to see the storyline behind it, and the storyline with Akama and Black Temple was amazingly done, always amazingly developed. Really interesting to learn about it.
they're tall, blue-skinned, and hoofed beings with glowing eyes and also tails, and are devout followers of the light, led by their leader, Prophet Velen. After crash landing on Azeroth in their ship, the Exodar, they joined the Alliance to fight evil.
This is like he explains the backstory line of World of Warcraft and how the Draenei come in our world, and it's amazing storyline.
And are known for their wisdom and resilience. As for the Blood Elves, they already had established a presence in vanilla. Many people don't remember them because they shared the same models as the Night Elves, but they were just lighter in skin tone and hair color. They saw their official release in the expansion, however, along with a makeover where they actually got their own unique models and animations. Lore-wise, they were introduced as a once proud people that were decimated by the Scourge. They hailed from their homeland, Kothalas, and they had turned to fell magic to sate their arcane addiction after the Sunwell's destruction, which caused their eyes to glow green.
Some of those things even myself don't know. But I have to say, Isle of Quel'Danas, if I'm saying this correctly, was so beautiful place to explore back in the day, and it still is. It brings so much nostalgia when you go there again.
Led by their leader, Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider, they seek redemption and power, and they aligned themselves with the Horde for survival. Perhaps most importantly with these two races was that they allowed for the first time access to a unique class for both factions. the Paladin for the Horde and the Shaman for the Alliance. One of Vanilla's defining traits was that these two classes were locked to both of these factions, which created some interesting uniqueness and separation between.
Yes, exactly. I love that, man. And I think Blizzard made a mistake when they made every class or every race can play every class. That was like a mistake. You like remove the uniqueness from the characters. Back in the day, it was clear when you're a paladin, either you play a blood elf or you play human. But it was basically simple.
The Horde and the Alliance, but also difficulties in balance since they were so wildly different and they brought different strengths and weaknesses. So perhaps similar to the raid size reduction, this could have been another case of the developers making their lives easier in raid design by having a more equal playing field. But as we learned with BFA and Draenor, the main features are really only as strong as their supporting features. Professions and skill crafting are their own form of endgame for many players, and they would see a lot of love across the board with new recipes and specialization quests.
Exactly, I love that in Burning Crusade. How professions played a huge role in PvP and PvE. The weapons that you had designed as a warrior and used them in arena was basically a really huge thing. You had to farm it for weeks on end. And when you have equipped it, it was really powerful weapon. I mean, like powerful, like one of the ones you acquire from playing arena. So back in the day, professions were like really important for PvP and PvE.
But perhaps most notable would be the addition of a new one, jewel crafting, where by mining, players could loot gems and create various items and jewelry, or cut them into various stat boosts, which were then applied to the also new socketed items. Many of the new items in BC would have different colored sockets to match with certain gems, playing off of the color wheel, which added another layer of customization on top of the enchant system that was already in place. But PvE wasn't the only area to see change, as it was the Burning Crusade is when arena modes made their debut. Up until this point, there were three main choices for PvP: to fight out in the open world, inside of instance battlegrounds with objectives to compete for, or in friendly duels outside of your major capital.
Hol dir eine von 6 Sammelfiguren im Friends-Menü. Nur bei McDonald's.
Back in the day, it was really popular to fight. And they were like, that time they were making a lot of raids as well, guild raids that you fight the capital cities.
Share of competitiveness, with Battlegrounds probably being the most intense. Blizzard wasn't quite satisfied, and they wanted to gain some ground on the then growing esports scene. They had already seen some success with their RTS series, Warcraft and Starcraft. Starcraft in particular was gaining some serious popularity, so it only made sense that they saw the potential with their MMO juggernaut, and so the arena system was born, where there was just one objective: kill the other team in a one-life team.
Exactly, the arena system changed the whole World of Warcraft scenario back in the day. That's why I think the Burning Crusade was the defining factor that made what Blizzard was much, much better. The inventions, what they created, that everything was new, it was just no match for another game.
Team deathmatch setting. Players could create teams of 2, 3, or 5 and compete against each other in various arenas for ranking, which would unlock access to high-level PvP gear and other rewards such as mounts. These pieces also had a new stat called Resilience, which reduced damage taken from other players in an effort to make the PvP less bursty and more controlled, and this itself was a huge change in the flow of the PvP of the game.
Yes,
it was a clear challenge from the developer. You think you're good at PvP? Well, now it's time to prove it. They had hoped that this system would foster a more competitive...
Exactly, this is what made Blizzard and this game so unique. You could basically... This is when the chain CCs was born and game control was born, and skill was born as well in this game.
Environment, and finally allow them to bring World of Warcraft into esports along with Starcraft and Warcraft. And most exciting for many were the addition of flying mounts. Azeroth was a big place. Between the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, It held 38 zones to explore, and discounting flight paths and boats and zeppelins, it was all on the ground. And while this certainly has its advantages, such as giving the world the feeling of being massive and imposing, many dreamed of wresting control away from their pre-designated flight paths and to go where they pleased. As such, flying mounts became a highly requested feature throughout all of Vanilla's lifespan, and they finally saw it released in the Burning Crusade, where after reaching the new maximum level, 70, they could unlock the ability to...
People loved those flying mounts back in the day, man. It was a huge deal when you had a flying mount. They saw you like a god.
Train them, which allowed them to fly in the Outland, with Azeroth still being locked to the ground. And all of this was to start the expansion. These were but a few of the major features that the expansion had to offer, but previews alone looked quite promising. From this point, Blizzard would frequently post updates on their website and fed bits and pieces and details to the players little by little. And so, World of Warcraft Vanilla continued on. Eventually, the final raid, Nyxramas, was released, and the player base was left with a question: what's next? Well, on January 16th, 2007, they found out with the release of the hottest game's first expansion, the Burning Crusade.
It was the hottest. He's definitely right.
Flash.
The biggest, most interesting boss model, in my opinion, was Illidan. I mean, his legendary weapons, man. How can I have to speak about them? That was the best item design in any game, I believe. Nowadays, you don't ever see some design like that. It was insane. Like I said, the developers back then, the creativity was on another level, definitely.
Fantasy and fixation are the features that contribute to the addiction that millions cannot shake for an online game called World of Warcraft.
Exactly.
Now there's mania on top of madness for the game, and you've got to brace yourself for this. There's a new version that's about to erupt on the scene.
When it comes out, man, I'm just gonna non-stop.
Easy there, big guy.
I'm sorry for my girlfriend, because...
And this is true, like, this is not a joke. There was people that were playing, they didn't even want to sleep. They were barely sleeping. Me, myself as well, when I was 10, 11 years old, I woke up and I played until I go to bed. It was addiction. You were basically addicted to this game. That's how huge and fun it was to play, man.
I'm just gonna keep playing.
Understandable, because gamers...
Speaking from experience here, this was one of the most exciting times in the game's history. Being at the maximum level for so long, the idea of seeing new zones and going on new quests and getting more items was incredibly exciting.
Yes,
this was also before the era of digital downloads, so anyone who wanted a copy would have to physically leave their basements and go get them from the store. Many would attend launch parties and wait in line in tents, counting down the hours and minutes until midnight when they could pick up their copies. Now a nostalgic, long-lost tradition that came with new video game releases. Developers made special appearances in California, and they would sign copies before sending the players off into the Outland.
This made the game so much authentic when you can like hold the CD or the books that come with it, and it was authenticity that no longer exists. Definitely back then there was, like I said, creativity. It was on another level. From the books, the characters, the way the game was packed. It was another thing for creativity. And that's why and how Blizzard or World of Warcraft was so addicting.
Guilds raced to the new maximum level and started their attunement chains, and everyone watched as their classes grew, learning new spells and unlocking the mysteries of the Outland. They would storm through the Hellfire Peninsula and through the Dark Portal, and trudged through the swamps of Zangarmarsh and explored the rolling hills of Nagrand, all while fighting through hordes of the Burning Legion and their allies. Although I would say that it was the next expansion, Wrath, is when they...
This is why what I'm asking myself. Imagine you have a company so huge like Blizzard, and imagine you release the Burning Crusade. Before Burning Crusade, Vanilla World of Warcraft was already one of the best games. Imagine you outplay yourself or you outdo yourself and you release much bigger with the Burning Crusade. Now imagine what Blizzard did the third time with Wrath of the Lich King. They even outdid themselves one time more, and the Blizzard was, the Wrath of the Lich King was the pinnacle, I believe, from what Blizzard has given the world in gaming.
They really started to hit their stride with the storytelling. The Burning Crusade is when it really started to get some structure. In vanilla, important lore moments were sprinkled in here and there by way of quest dialogue, or perhaps in-game books that the players could read through. But for the most part, the world itself was the main character, and it was more about just being a very small part of it. While this isn't necessarily inferior, it was the Burning Crusade is when they started to transition away from the world and more towards important lore characters. The story and the plot would be more integrated into the quests themselves, and there'd be more instances of NPCs where they would engage in dialogue with the players. Expansion villains were also introduced early on in quest chains, which would lead to dungeons themselves and then finally raids. And they really started leaning heavily on characters established within the lore, such as the first demon hunter, Illidan Stormrage, and his ally, Kel'Thas Sunstrider. The raids were also a very large part of the.
And how insane is, after you beat Illidan or you move to the next expansions, you understand that beating him was like a mistake. He was the good guy that later comes in the story. Well, spoilers alert for everyone watching. But it's like already old expansion.
Whether it be the Sanctum of the Fallen Guardian, Medivh, or the time traveling in the battle for Mount Hyjal, or fighting through the halls of the fallen Eridar capital, it was clear that the lore and story had started to really become a large focus of the game.
The story became a huge part of the gameplay.
They were as difficult as ever. Heroics were split up in theme into different hubs spread throughout the world, and they provided pretty stiff challenges, especially early on, and they rewarded valuable loot in return. Many today reminisce that the raids were the hardest in the game's history. The actual raid size was reduced, but this meant there was less room for dead weight. Each of the 25 players had to be very capable and on top of their game to clear.
Exactly, they everyone should new tactics, so nobody will wipe the raid. So tactics were everything changed for raiding, should I say.
Through them before they would eventually be hit with the nerf bat. This was just due to their sheer difficulty, but another huge part of it was just the fact that there was still only one difficulty mode. Today, especially since the cataclysm with the release of the Looking for Raid mode, some would even say it's a trivial matter to see all of what the game has to offer at its most base level. But back then, if you couldn't kill a boss, there was no lower difficulty mode to run to. Either.
Yes, exactly. Either you kill it or you don't move past it. And it was such a unique thing. Back in the day, it was not really hard to kill the bosses like nowadays, but still you had to like play as a team to beat it. You kind of had to know some basic tactics to bring a boss down.
Just had to play better and kill it, yes, or hope that it would be tuned down. And while this is certainly unforgiving, it also ensured that there was always something to work towards. There would always be some optimization you could do. It could be a gear piece to acquire, maybe some enchants or gems to tweak, and it demanded that players to look at any and all crevice for ways to improve their characters and their gameplay. So even zoning into them was a challenge, as it also marks the era of attunements, long quest chains that required a campaign across the Outland and its dungeons, and even previous raid tiers. They would be complicated enough that diagrams like this would be needed to even understand it all. And it served as its own form of character progression beyond the traditional leveling.
The good old days, the chain quests.
And gearing that players were familiar with. So, all of this is to say, especially with the player's skill level at the time and the limit of information across social media, there was certainly no shortage of difficulty in the Burning Crusade. And as for its overall balance, the Horde finally got to enjoy the benefits of Paladin blessings, and likewise the Alliance saw benefits from Shaman totems, which brought this new element of balance and meta to the game. And speaking of this, and this wasn't something that you would find on the list of major features, but another thing that really defined the expansion was the way that the classes evolved. As revolutionary as vanilla was at the time,
Exactly. Every class had its own skill, and every class was good at some boss. It was not like in vanilla.
the class balance was still in its early stages, and there would be some specializations that you would rarely see in any area of the game, not just raiding. Certain classes like paladins were primarily forced to heal, as their damage and tanking trees weren't very effective. Some specializations would run out of mana.
I remember that I had seen that in Wrath of the Lich King as well, where elemental shamans were like not that great to raid with, so you had to play shaman as a resto.
In the first 30 seconds of a fight, so the Burning Crusade sought to change this with huge reforms to class balance and bringing specializations like the Retribution Paladin up to be more viable, or perhaps giving Shadow Priests a way to regenerate mana, or giving Druids an actual resurrection. And it's because of this is why a lot of people today see Burning Crusade as this sort of sweet spot of having a lot of the charm of vanilla World of Warcraft.
Exactly, that's why I think it's one of the best expansion, because it's made in between simplicity and something that's hard to achieve, if you know what I mean. It's in the middle. That's like the sweet spot where it's not too easy and it's not too hard, and it's enjoyable for both people. It's enjoyable for the one that has a lot of experience playing this game, and for the one that's completely new into the game.
But without a lot of the jank, especially in terms of its class balance, or lack thereof. And as for Arena, it's a high activity from across the board as the game's best players began to separate themselves apart from everyone. It was during this time that the esports scene for the game had started to grow, and Blizzard started hosting tournaments and pitting the best against the best. Personalities tied to the game had started to gain followings, and it really marked a new era in the PvP side of
It really did. When somebody released PvP videos back in the day, like Swifty and Rekful, after that started streaming, that changed the whole genre and the whole world of gaming.
the game. And beyond all of that, flying, jewel crafting, the new races, it was all received quite favorably. And the players just seemed to be lost in the enjoyment of all of the shiny new things. As always, though, it wasn't all perfect, and I always like to include both sides of the story with these videos. There definitely were complaints to be found.
I definitely would complain that the PvP was not really balanced. I used to play Resto Shaman back in TBC, and I got like top 5 on a private server. And there was like a mage rogue that you couldn't get past to. The top ranking system was all about mage rogue or priest. And it was basically impossible to survive them as shaman. I remember rage quitting and quitting completely the game just because of that. Because there was not enough spells to do. You couldn't like do anything. You're stuck in stun or freeze and you basically die. I was so pissed about it. And that's when I joined Wrath of the Lich King. And it was completely better than the Burning Crusade for me.
Popular as flying mounts were, they did also have a negative effect in the previously mentioned feeling of being in this massive world. It's the massively multiplayer online role-playing game. It's literally in the name. The feeling of this massiveness and enormity is a core pillar of the genre, and as inconvenient as it was to trudge around on the ground, having your wings clipped and being forced to navigate it in this way really did a lot to give the players the feeling of this enormity and danger within the world. Combining the flying and the expansion's relatively small landmass in comparison to Azeroth, the world did have quite a small feeling to it. Especially once players started unlocking the fastest speed. You could really go from one corner of the world to another in minutes, which was something that wasn't possible in vanilla, barring the pre-designated travel options.
You could cover territories really fast, which was amazing.
It's like boats or zeppelins. Another negative for some would be that with the Paladin and Shaman now being shared, although the game was much more balanced and the fights were more easily designed, many argued that it also lost a lot of its unique charm. These two classes being restricted was just another thing that set the factions apart from one another. Some argue that one of Vanilla's greatest strengths is its greatest weakness. With imbalance comes uniqueness and
Exactly, you learn what you can abuse, let's say, or what's the best for your class. Exactly. I feel what he's saying, and it's true, it's really true. Not always unbalance means bad. Sometimes unbalance means fun.
a lack of curation and restrictions. And for many, that's really one of the major appeals of the genre. You're sort of thrown into this world, and the experience is what you make of it, almost like an unrestricted playground. And while the Burning Crusade was far from it, this fixation on balance, many remark today, is the source of removing a lot of its charm and uniqueness and freedom. Eventually, Blizzard would start seeing weaknesses in classes as straight-up flaws.
And that's why I think that's not really a good way to see that. Weakness doesn't mean always flaw. Sometimes can it mean uniqueness and fun.
And sought to remove them completely for the sake of balance. But in the process of doing so, they began to lose their identity and started to bleed into one another. So much to the point that they had to completely redo all of them in the Legion expansion to give them an actual identity once again. Another complaint, again not tied to the expansion itself, was that it also marked the birth of daily hubs. In the Outland, there were various factions where, in order to further your reputation with them, you'd need to return daily and complete a set of tasks. This was done to add incentive to keep logging in every day. And as you would know if you saw the Battle for Azeroth episode, this would eventually become a monster that they lost control of, and it slowly transitioned from an incentive to log in to a punishment for not logging in.
Yes, and it basically kills the fun of having you to play the game. Exactly. You shouldn't be forced to play the game. You want to be freewheeling to log into the game and play it. You have to be kind of addicted. That's what makes everything fun.
As they began to dominate every corner of activity. In BC itself, it was rather contained, but it did mark the beginning of a real problem. But
Es ist nicht sci-fi.
It did mark a time in the beginning, like you said. That's actually true. Back then, the game was just unique.
in the criticism section, when I'm mentioning things that weren't even problems during the time, you know it was pretty good. The Burning Crusade had a lot of improvements, certainly a lot to unpack, and it was delivered quite well with a strong cadence of patches to follow. There were some fairly sizable dead spots, but largely because everything was so difficult. Many were actually quite thankful for having a chance to catch up and actually finish a raid before the next one was released. It marks one of the most exciting periods in the game's history. This already massive worldwide phenomenon somehow became even bigger, and the rising...
Exactly, that's what I said. Imagine you are the biggest and you make something that's even bigger than you and yourself. And you make it a third time and even bigger. That was Blizzard back in the days.
Subscription numbers show that quite clearly. The expansion today is looked back upon very favorably. For many, it's their favorite era of the game, and it marks a time where the confidence in Blizzard and their games was at this all-time high, and the community was extremely excited and optimistic, and it's certainly earned its reputation as one of the greats of not only the MMORPG genre, but the gaming industry at large.
Exactly. That's true. Now we see the best.
Thanks for watching my video. So this is the fourth in the series and the second of the greats.
That's it, guys. If you enjoyed this video, comment down below what you think, what are your thoughts, what made the Burning Crusade one of the best expansions. Have you played it? Have you enjoyed it? And if you did enjoy this video as well, you can like it, sub to my channel for more videos like this.